Good afternoon and welcome at our symposium, The Future of the Data-Driven Society. I'm Martin Paul, I'm the president of this university, and I'm welcoming on behalf of my colleagues Rianne Letschert and Nick Voss in this pre-program or appetizer for our Dies Natalis, which we will celebrate tomorrow. The topic is, of course, very prominently present in Dutch universities and in Dutch society, and not only in the Netherlands, should I say, also beyond our borders. And to tell you a little story, the executive board of the Dutch Association of Research Universities a year ago wrote a paper called the Digitale Samenleving, or the Digital Society, although I think samenleving means something else than just society. And somebody commented after they read this paper, it looked like a group of people in a retirement home that are thinking what they should do with a computer. And it became very clear after reading these papers that if you want talk about the digital society, you need to involve the broad community of students, experts, academics, and the educational and in the research field, because it's really a holistic approach that we need to address this issue, and not only the future, but also the present, because the future is not tomorrow, it's today in this field. We are rapidly moving ahead. So Maastricht University has decided to take on this challenge, I would say, in the typical Maastricht style. That means based on interdisciplinary, on our strengths, with our international links, and in the broadest sense of the word. Because digital society does not mean that it's only about computer science and data experts, because it has many implications. For example, implications in education, how we training our students to be fit for this future that started yesterday. Or what does it mean for our operations in the medical area, but also how we're doing things in our research context, our research infrastructure. And last not least, and very importantly, and this is, I think, also a peculiar strength of our university, what are the societal, ethical, legal, and economic side effects of this development? And so I'm very happy that we can use this symposium not as a kickoff, but as a, I would say, almost state-of-the-art definition where we are, and particularly want to go. And I'm very happy that IDS, the Institute, the Interdisciplinary Institute of Data Sciences, with Michel Dumedier, but also all the others of this data science ecosystem that we have developed here in the last time, is here, whether they are from the Department of Knowledge Engineering, the Faculty of Health, Medicine of Life Sciences, the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, all other faculties, but also from the Brightlands Smart Services campus in Heerlen that we use as an important new value proposition, how we can work together in co-creation with our partners in the public and private sector. Or our Institute BIS, where we do the same thing with co-creation and also have linked this to an innovative master program. So there's much to be discussed, and it's not me who's discussing it. We are very happy that our two honorary laureates of tomorrow are going to sharing some ideas with us about this issue. I'm also very happy that we have a competition. Yes, we have a wonderful jury here assembled, I think, behind me. I mean, I feel almost like the European Song Contest, yeah? And I think we have people that watching us by camera outside, so it will be a fascinating afternoon. But most of all, I think this university is about community. As you know, our strategic program, Community at the Core, really defines what we mean by this. An academic community within ourselves, but also our outreach to the community. And of course, we have a data science community. And I think let's have a look how this data science community is functioning real life. And I think with that, I'll hope that something is happening behind me. Again, European Song Contest, something goes wrong there. And anyway, I wish all of us a very stimulating afternoon. Enjoy.
Data, information and knowledge are driving the development of modern society. The revolution of new methodologies and technologies we are discovering and developing continues to push us further ahead.
And so data science is at this intersection of mathematics and statistics and computer science. And the social sciences as well, and other kinds of sciences participate in this endeavor. So it's like a real interdisciplinary, it's a core that everybody can share.
Maastricht University and its data science community invite you to break down barriers and become a pioneer, developing new initiatives and solutions inside academia and beyond. As a young university in the heart of Europe, Maastricht University has a distinct global perspective and a strong focus on innovative education and research. The open and inclusive academic environment, together with a strong data science community already active for more than 25 years, is paving the way for a bright future. We are accelerating the pace of scientific breakthroughs by improving the reusability of data sets. For example, we are helping researchers find new applications for existing medication as an alternative to expensive long-term research and development projects. Accelerating research results and applications is but one of the ambitions for data science in Maastricht. We plan to be the first fair university by the year 2025. Being fair means that data sets and software are findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, so as to enable even more groundbreaking applications.
Well, the use of data science and the development of digital applications that are going to come out of that will affect our lives in more and more aspects. So this is going to change how we work and communicate. It's going to affect how we promote health and how we fight disease. It's going to have major consequences on all aspects of society. So some of these issues and questions will have technical solutions, but many of them point to broader societal questions that we're going to need to address with ethical innovation, legal innovation, thinking about new models of governance of how we share and use data that will be in line with public values. We need to be collaborating as different types of scientists, LC and data scientists and medical researchers, for example, early on to allow this ethical societal viewpoint to be integrated into the research.
The Maastricht data science community is inclusive and extends beyond the university as an institution. For example, at the Business Intelligence and Smart Services Institute at the Brightlands Smart Services campus, data, science and business intelligence is combined with service design to create innovative solutions together with established companies as well as new startups. In collaboration with the Maastricht University Medical Centre, we are exploring the next steps in research to improve healthcare and well-being. For students, there is the unique honours programme Knowledge Engineering at Work, which allows students to work part-time on innovative projects with local businesses and organisations and provides valuable contacts for their future employability. So join us and see how data science can facilitate and strengthen collaborative initiatives in education and research throughout the university and across all disciplines. And most importantly, to use data science to create knowledge that strengthens and empowers society.
Right. Wow, that's really great. It's so my name is Michel Dumontier. I'm a new professor here at Maastricht University for now 1 year, and one of the proponents of this idea that we can build out our community. That data science has a rich history here at Maastricht University, and it's time for us to show everybody that that's what we do here. It's my pleasure to introduce one of our keynote speakers today. Her name is Carol Gobel, and Carol is one of those really exceptional people that you rarely get to meet in your lifetime. Sorry, Carol, that's a lot to put on you. As you will see, she is full of creative energy and boundless enthusiasm. And she's been an exemplary mentor for myself and countless others. Over the past 25 years, Carol has worked on accelerating scientific discovery through distributed computing solutions, semantic knowledge management, scientific software engineering, and new models of scholarship for data-intensive science. As an applied computer scientist, she has always worked alongside others in multiple disciplines and brought social collaboration to bioinformatics, and particularly to systems biology. She's responsible for many of the widely used open science software, and she's been a strong advocate for putting software innovation into practice. We are thrilled that you could join us today, Carol, and we've prepared a short video to further introduce you to the rest of the community, after which we invite you to give your talk.
Carol Gobel is Professor of Computer Science at the University of Manchester. She was awarded the first Jim Gray E-Science Award in recognition of her achievements in the application of computing technology to scientific insight and innovation. She was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire for her contributions to science. If there were an award for festival-going veterans, a nomination would definitely be hers. Carol Gobel's main objective is to enable scientists and citizens to better find, access, and use information, with research topics ranging from the semantic web to information management systems. Central to Carol Gobel's work is creating opportunities for discovery. Her collaborations have recently focused on systems biology and e-laboratories for health.
Well, gracious, that's a lot to live up to. And I don't know where you got some of those videos from. And yes, I do go to a lot of rock festivals, it is true. Welcome to my talk. I'm going to be talking about a very interesting society, which is the Society of Scientists, who are then, in turn, supporting society. So it's a little bit of an introspective talk in that sense. Data-driven science, we're familiar with it. This is what this centre is all about. This is what Maastricht is really investing in. How do we put data exploration, data processing, analytics, and so on to the hands of us being able to do scientific innovation? I'm somebody who works particularly at the supportive end. So I do e-science, and I'm enabling data-driven science. And in fact, I go even further down in that I am building e-infrastructure, as Michelle so kindly said, to enable e-science to happen. So I harness distributed computing, data management catalogs, that sort of thing, in order that he can then do some fantastic innovations. So I'm in the underwear of the world. And the rest of you can glorify it in the upperwear. And of course, the trouble with underwear is it should never be seen. So I suffer from the invisibility aspect, that everybody wants me, everybody wants to know I'm there, nobody wants to see me, and they don't want to even admit that I exist. Let's go back to that later on. So I'm particularly been driving this agenda with many others about open science and open data, reproducible science, so that we can trust it, so that it can be validated, so that we can put it out not just amongst our own collaborators and colleagues, but to citizens and to other colleagues in other sciences and other disciplines that then have to trust and recognize that those results and those objects are validated. But also to personally productive science, and I'll come back to that later on. As Michelle's already said, FAIR, Michelle is one of the lead authors of the incredibly influential FAIR Guiding Principles, which is now part of European rhetoric at the Commission's level. So it means findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable principles. But behind those words are citable, understandable, reproducible. And what does this mean in a nutshell? Technically, it means we label everything, and we can describe everything such that a machine can understand it. That's basically it. And you can access things. Politically, it's an incredibly important meme, a flag. We've been talking about this for years, but it took a Dutchman, I'm afraid to say, in the sense of I'm an English speaker and he's a Dutchman, to come up with the word. So that tells me that was Baron Mons. So if only we'd come up with FAIR 20 years ago. So I work with scientists. My society is scientists and engineers working together, and different kinds of scientists working together, doing data-driven scholarship. So these are project teams of individuals. So when I talk about e-science, I actually say I don't really do e-science. I work with lots of scientists. So I work in an ecosystem rather than an ecosystem. And this is very important because all of these teams are going to be collaborating, but really competing at the same time. So science is fundamentally collaborating to compete. And that makes it quite challenging. This is biodiversity group. And what we were interested in doing is what's called knowledge turning. So to increase the flow of information from one laboratory to another, where each laboratory is both collaborating and competing, because one of the difficulties about information exchange or getting hold and accessing fair information is just getting access to it in a timely manner. Particularly as we know that science is cumulative and dynamic. It's constantly in change, so there's new ideas, new data, new software, new activities. But it's cumulative as well. We need to combine it in order to be able to process it, in order to be able to make progress. So what we've been moving towards is more of a commons model, a commons where we work together in order to be able to achieve this, rather than creating these very difficult transfer pipes. So what I mean by commons is resources that are naturally, that collectively created, collectively owned or shared, and mean that we can transfer those resources between communities with governance, and there is ethics and so on associated with this. And it's a bit like a natural commons. So in natural commons we have water is a natural commons, a natural resource, but here is a knowledge commons. And here's an illustration of commons. So I work in life sciences, and life sciences, when I looked in the fair sharing catalogue, currently has 1,011 data sets that warrant being registered as key data sets. That's a lot, and let alone the tools. They're distributed, they're fragmented, they're siloed. It's a collection of resources with no single entry point. They're all living, and above is a collection of people which from Elixir, which is a 22-nation organization across Europe in order to be able to manage that life science data collection. And Maastricht is a key member of the Dutch node of that activity, and I co-lead the interoperability track of that activity. So this commons is a macro commons, so it's lots of public resources managed by big data centers, journals, dedicated projects build it, for example, the Human Cell Atlas, which is dedicated to cataloguing every single cell of the body, so no ambition there. Governance around that. But then it's the majority of the researchers, which are the micro contributors to this pool, which is you guys, many of you. You're doing some research and then you deposit it in a public data set or you publish it in a journal. It's people in labs and universities, it's the generators who are working with their own resources. So this is a commons which might be managed by national data sets, but is filled, it's pooled by a huge collection of researchers. So to come to some science, because that's all very interesting, but so here is some science from my biodiversity group that I just mentioned. This is to do some predictive science in ecological niche modeling. This is going to see if we can trace the niches of these grazers and predatory fish and alga in the Baltic area in order to be able to see what's happening due to various different climatic conditions to the species. So it's basically we're looking for indigenous species or alien species and their movements and predicting what will happen in 50 years' time. To produce a paper, that's what scientists do. So what does that mean? What do we actually do then? We take in a load of stuff from this commons, tools and data sets. We do some data collection ourselves. We do some data discovery across we have reference data sets. We then do data assembly and cleaning and refinement in order to make everything work together. We then run a whole bunch of models. We produce some visualization. We produce yet another spreadsheet because spreadsheets are the blood of science. Everything is about spreadsheets. And then we produce some results, and hopefully we populate it back through our paper. So that's actually what we do. That is data-driven science. And we can kind of divide this up into two key areas, two interlinking loops, if you will. The doing the research and then publishing the research. And what's happened that stopped the knowledge transfer is they're different. They're two things. There's a tiny little bit here of this little middle bit where a few little things are leaked out, and it's very difficult to get them out. And when you've got them out, it's very difficult then to put them back so that you can then say, in my own research environment, I want to be able to run that piece of software. I want to be able to myself implement that algorithm. I want to be able to reuse that data. It's incredibly difficult. It's like you have to start again. So this kind of cycle is we've separated out these two marketplaces, if you will. And we have to be able to improve that if we want to be able to get true productive open science. Particularly, as in both cases, it's constantly active. It's building on prior work. The research area is constantly changing. So we've published something. It's like we've thrown it out and fossilized it and then forgotten about it, and then we move on to the next thing. So we've got a sort of independent snapshot, discrete world, and we've got a continuously changing, evolving world on this side. And if we want to build up the body of work of a research group, we have to kind of forensically analyze its published world in order to be able to incorporate it. And yet, we could have kept track of that. As Dan Reed says, the questions don't change, but the answers do. So, because everything is constantly in flux. And this is just an illustration of the complexity of those worlds with these different tools. So I'm going to talk about two different aspects that I've personally been working on in order to be able to break down this little barrier between these two different areas, the doing of research and the disseminating of research. And the first is going to be portable, automated, reproducible methods. Now, we already saw this method. This is quite a standard practice, this workflow. You have some materials that you want to be able to find out where they came from and clean them up. You have a method that you want to be able to have described in a clear, comprehensible and replicable logged way. And in the middle, you have some modeling steps where you have numerous continuous repetition, where you're going to do many different variations. You're going to sweep through various different parameters and various different data sets and do various different comparisons and keep track of all of this. This is quite normal. This also points out that while we're doing exciting data science analytics, machine learning, deep learning, groovy stuff, underneath is the underwear. It's the data stewardship, the software stewardship, the preparation and the processing. And this is much bigger. This is what the data commons is all about. 80% of that workflow, which is a real workflow that really supported that paper, was about the prep. And then the model bit was just, so we just ran the models on a supercomputer, it was fine. And then we analyzed it. But it was the prep. That's what killed everything, the data wrangling these instruments. So what we pioneered was the idea of these are really commodities. These are method commodities that we make as instruments that we can then disseminate as real objects and commodities. So we built a workflow system called Taverna 14 years ago. We released this to automate and do this at sort of these pipelines at scale. And we built a sharing platform, a collaboration platform, a commons for being able to share those workflows so that we would try, and then you could plug in these workflows as instruments, as tools into, say, a web browser, and then you could run them, you could use them over and over again for a different indigenous species or a different, like crabs and things like this. They used it for all these kinds of things because it was the same stuff, just slightly different, because all of this stuff is variation on a theme. So we could make this machinery. So my first point is that what you're building in data science are data scopes. They're like telescopes and microscopes, they're instruments. They have inputs and outputs and materials. So you have a laboratory, but your laboratory is built of instruments that enable you to examine data. And those instruments can be shared and exchanged between the different communities. But you have to maintain them, and you have to document them, because instruments break, and instruments also change as technology changes. So my second point is software, and these are all software instruments, is a first-class member of data-driven science. And I was very pleased to see on the video that Michelle had included software, because we have an enormous amount of software, but not very good software training, actually. So software needs to be professionalized if you're going to look after these instruments. So we pioneered at Manchester the idea of research software engineers, I co-founded the Software Sustainability Institute in order to be able to look after these instruments. So then we went on to build this Commons, which was basically an instrument catalogue, if you like. It's on its 10th anniversary. And we wanted to be able to build credit around it, citation around it, around objects that weren't just data and weren't just papers, so that we would be able to replicate. You could go and see what was really done, you could take this, and you could run it yourself. And if you couldn't run it yourself for some reason, perhaps one of the codes was no longer viable, at least you could see what was done and repair it. Or you could repurpose it by changing it and adapting it and forking it. So, do you want to answer that? It's all right. If you're one of my undergraduates, we'd all listen. So, but what this tells me, though, is that this is multiple part. These are multi-part objects. It's not just one thing, it's many things. So for one of these workflows, you have the workflow engine to run it, you have the script, which is the workflow description, but you have everything else around it. You have the parameters, you authored it, a log of what actually happened, what's the execution environment, what were the inputs, what were the outputs, and so on. So it's an object, it's not just one thing, it's many different parts. And these objects will be held somewhere else as well. So this is an object, it's like a bag where the things are also pointing out into the world. It's what the clouds mean. So now we have to be able to, if we want to exchange this, we have to richly describe this. And so we need a metadata object. So we need to describe the manifest of this box. So the analogy is a kind of box, a container. And we're going to have to describe where things came from, what's their relationships between them, what's the versions, because it's all changing, what's the checklist of what I expect to be there. So this is all about describing these research capacities so that I can take one, understand it, and run it, to turn them into active objects. And so that's what we've been doing, really, and lately we've been driving this at a more global scale, as it were, because now there are many, that 14 years ago, workflows were considered odd, eccentric. Now they're standard. There are many different, there's a whole zoo of workflow languages and workflow environments. So we've been pioneering the notion of a common workflow language, which allows us to describe all those different components, and then it didn't matter which workflow system you were using, you could combine different pieces, so it's like Lego, workflow Lego, and then you can run them. And this is called the Common Workflow Language, which I'm honoured to be the godmother of, while people are busy slaving away. And note, this is for those of the technical amongst you, that this viewer here, which is a Manchester viewer, runs over GitHub. So these things are constantly evolving, and then we snapshot them when we want to be able to fix it. That's how we want to say. But this tells us something, the next step, which is we should not be publishing research, we should be releasing research. And that means constantly updating. And so all these research objects are not like data, and they're not like papers, they're like software. And in fact, all science is like that. So we should treat all products and all research like it's software. You need to abandon the model of publishing and then moving on, and actually instead have continuous releasing, so that we don't have to reconstruct the body of work again from somebody's research, because it's already constructed. We can see that. And those research objects we can generalize. So this is the notion of an evolving manuscript. And this handsome man at the bottom is Sir Mark Walport, who is now in charge of all the research councils of the United Kingdom. And he promotes the idea of an evolving manuscript, which is quite interesting that we finally have somebody in charge who actually has this vision. So these research objects are actually generalizable things. We can build, there's the workflow, the software, the model, and so on. They overlay that research commons that I was talking about. They're living in that environment. So those components may be held by others. And this gives a fantastic opportunity for data scientists, social scientists as well, legal and governance, in order to think, how on earth would that work when you have this virtual thing that you're exchanging as your art, as your scholarly currency, which is constantly changing, owned by somebody else? That's an interesting issue. So we're building the metadata across them so that we can be able to understand how to link across them. They're self-describing. We can go back to navigating and pivoting on them. So we can say, tell me everything, every research object that had this piece of software in it, and then build a profile around the software, not the paper, the software. We also want to move them between researchers. So we need to track them. You know, this is now, these are like boundary objects, they're like moving around. So how are we going to manage that? And I have to get the word blockchain in at least once. So here we are, here's the blockchain opportunity. So in Manchester, we've been, and elsewhere, we run a whole thing where we've been developing this research object kind of metadata framework. And the time is right, because all of these different projects and activities are basically going in the same sort of direction, including Food and Drug Administration, NHS, NIH, and so on. And journals. This is the direction that journals are also moving in. Publishers, researchers, infrastructure providers, communities, libraries, all moving in this direction. The packaging direction, living objects, and so on. Joe Blog researcher? No. This is so we have mostly of the technology in there, but we haven't actually got the social aspect sorted out, the engagement, and we haven't got the process, because we're still operating in a 19th century publishing process, where we've got a 21st century exchange process. So what are we going to do about the collaboration? So how do we get those people? So we've done all this cool stuff, but how are we going to bridge from the researcher to this new vision? So that's the piece I've been doing with systems biologists. So I was tasked with building a systems biology collaboration environment for small to medium multidisciplinary groups with multi-sites, all competing with one another, with self-deposit, with no skills from the point of view of data. So to foster stewardship, to stimulate sharing, to ensure retention, and so on, and without them ever being given any extra resources, and made to do it by their funders. So we were very popular when we arrived, as you can imagine. So here's an example of a systems biology project. This is from Schnupp and his team in South Africa. It's about malaria, parasite. This project has published. It has 3 studies, 24 experiments associated with it, 19 models, 13 standard operating procedures in the wet lab, 16 different kinds of data entry or data file, 2 articles and a presentation. And those components some of them are stored internally in our own Commons platform, but many of them are scattered into the appropriate repositories of that discipline. The model goes into the biomodels repository. The enzymic data goes into SABIO-RK, and so on and so forth. Because we're using this to bridge across the community commons, but also to build our own integrated view over it, and to prepare the data such that it is right when it goes into those resources. So we built this Fairdom Hub. It's a systems biology commons, and it integrates across this scattered commons that we've already talked about. Of course, it's research objects. It's research objects disguised in a website. But the interesting thing about this project is the collaboration piece. This was about sharing and being able to exchange results. We had to build self-controlled spaces, so spaces where people controlled things themselves. People really wanted to discover their own assets amongst their own project, let alone across the projects. And these kinds of questions people were wanting to ask. Where is the validation for this? What standard operating procedure was used to generate this sample, and so on. To do this, we had to build the commons. So we did it with project pals, that is postdocs and postgraduates. Enormous amount of stewardship support, 1/3 technical, 2/3 social stewardship support. And with the program funders, and the program funders are an incredibly important stakeholder. So what happened? Well, 90 projects currently use this platform, and another 40 have installed it into their own internal projects. So from that point of view, it's enormously successful. But we can also now have a playground in order to observe behavior, the tragedy of the commons and fair play. Well, what happens? No surprises to you guys. You get sharing with your mates, but you don't like sharing with people you don't know. You hoard or hug. There's a lot of flirting. So that's, I have a little bit of metadata that I tell you, so you can see, I show it to you a little bit, but if you want more, you're going to have to put me on your paper. So this is flirting, right? Voyeurism, where people just want to see what is there, but they don't want to participate. Real asymmetry. So I want to be credited with me being able to, I want to be cited if I put something in, but I don't want to cite you. So it's very asymmetric. It's this playground rules. And this addresses the values of what are assets, the value of reproducibility, the value of metadata, the economics of infrastructures is surprisingly, or maybe not, immature. And that's because of many things, but two big things. One, we are currently operating a scientific sweatshop. So when I started 30 years ago, research, to be honest, was like a country club. We all got together and we had a good chat over beer, and then we did some cool research. Now, in the UK, it's a sweatshop. Have you got this paper? You know, build more tractors, do this, do that. It's like this. So burden is enormous. And so people are looking for short-term shortcuts. Time and skills aren't... Time is what... Metadata takes time. Reproducibility takes time. And there also has to be the last mile tools. I've got this fantastic infrastructure. I've got my spreadsheet. What's the bridge? What's the last mile? You know, where are the tools and the templates? Where's the automation? The debt of trying to make something better, describing something richly, so somebody I don't even know who's a potential rival will be able to reuse it, is quite high. And that's because we have this kind of different interests. The commons believes in service. The researchers believe in self. The commons believes in reproducibility. Reproducibility is not high on the agenda of any of our principal investigators. Productivity is. So if you can pitch this as productivity, you're much better. The biggest drawback to adoption is principal investigators, actually. Principal investigators and journal editors, not publishers, journal editors. And so on. So if we're going to push fair, making things fair upstream to those who create it, we're going to have to deal with these social issues. And John Ioannidis, who's a very famous professor who specializes in reproducibility, said at the Open Science Fair, sloppy science wins. And so this is a challenge. So to overcome the tragedy of the commons in my last 3 minutes, We have to go professional stewardship. We have to build ramps to get over that last mile. We have to defeat cultural inertia, so that's easy. And we have to develop processes and social environments such that we can pay for infrastructure. Because as I said, it's underwear. Nobody sees it. Nobody wants to pay for it. So to do this, I'm now heavily engaged in international activities, particularly European activities, that are trying to do the social manoeuvring and trying to get government, funders, communities to recognise the importance to do the social movement, to move the inertia piece. So I work for Elixir, European Open Science Cloud, and so on. For the other incentives, actually those incentives, we know that in commons production, for things like Wikipedia, for things like Fairdom, for things, the commons, there are only 4 incentives in the world. Love, money, fame, and doing it by side effect, so you don't know you're doing it. Now, love would be great. Money, I'm doing it because my funders won't give me any more money if I don't do it. Fame, I'll get credit. These two have turned out to be difficult to actually operationalize effectively. So by side effect, we have to do it by side effect. And the biggest problem for the commons, the sharing, is metadata, describing things. So here's 2 side effects that I've been pioneering. The first is bioschemas, where we universally tag all of life science commodities at the web scale to build a web scale knowledge graph. So that's easy, and it is easy because we're going to use Google. Because we use schema, we do something that's schema.org, which is a way that describes a little bit of markup in the web. So if we can do a little bit of markup, we can build a universal knowledge graph. And the second, if you remember, I said spreadsheets are the Lord's work. Well, if you can fiddle with spreadsheets to make your metadata templates, to embed ontologies in them, and then harvest them by stealth, then your researchers just think they're using spreadsheets, but actually they're doing rich ontological descriptions by stealth. And this works quite well. So I would ask you, data scientists, do not ask what can the FAIR Commons do for data science. Ask what can data science do for the FAIR Commons. So what do you got in your machine learning bag, in your persuasive design, in your ethics and social understanding of societies that you can bring to help me and others to get our commons in order so that Michelle can then go do cool stuff with hospitals and so on. So 3 things to remember. Release FAIR research objects rather than publish static PDFs. Manage your data scopes and cherish them, and let's have some fair play incentives in place. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, we have a bit of time, perhaps, for a question. Anybody curious to ask Carol a follow-up question?
Nobody.
Oh, here we are, right here. Oh. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I'm Catalina Guanta. I'm from the law faculty of Maastricht University, and I have a very cultural question for you, coming from an environment and from a community of researchers for whom I think your presentation would be pretty much alien language, something in terms of alien languages. So how would it be possible to incentivize other fields that are not necessarily so familiar with data science to develop research in the FAIR scope?
Oh my word, gracious, it's hard enough for this lot. When I've worked out how to do it here, I'll let you know. So that's really hard. But I mean, I guess the thing that I used to do back in the day, because I'm a computer scientist, I'm an engineer, actually. I'm a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, so I really am, you know, here's my screwdriver. And I used to think, when I was a child, that things were technical, and they're not. They're social. So it's trying to understand, as I think was said in our introduction, the holistic piece. What's actually going on in the process? So we have the social, we have the technical, but we have a process operating. So what do we want to happen in that process? And what has to be the social and the technical things that need to change in order to be able to action that process? So I would look much more, and I look much more these days, about what is the process that we're trying to do? What are you trying to do? What is the purpose? And then from that, work backwards, rather than here's a solution and you must do it, but what is it you are trying to do? And therefore, what are the little interventions needed? I also used to think revolution was the way forward, but as Trotsky said, revolution is only possible when it becomes inevitable. I'm sure you knew that. And actually, Che Guevara also said, revolution doesn't happen. You have to shake the trees to make revolution happen. So I don't actually think that the revolution hasn't come, not really. So we have to build ramps. So we have to look at interventions till we get to a tipping point where the revolution becomes inevitable. So that's a long answer that didn't answer your question, but never mind.
All right, thank you very much, Carol. All right, so we're going to move on to the next part of our program here, which is about our competition for research proposals. So we had this really interesting competition where in November we launched a public call for innovative research proposals that use data science to tackle problems of societal importance. We received 13 submissions, all of which are actually available on our website. So we struck an interdisciplinary panel over here. So we have Andre Decker, Professor of Clinical Data Science at Maastricht Clinic. We have Eli Sapirs, Assistant Professor of Social Science Research Methods at FASOS. We have Katarina Stankova, who is an Assistant Professor at the Department of Data Science and Knowledge Engineering. We have Rudolf Müller, who is a Professor of Quantitative Economics at the School of Business and Economics and Director of the Business Intelligence and Smart Services Campus. And finally, we have Stefan Schmeiks, who is an Associate Professor of Econometrics at this SBE. So this group got together and looked at all of these different applications, looked at them in terms of their significance, their innovation, their societal relevance, the multidisciplinarity of the team, and also the alignment to the themes of the Institute of Data Science, that is accelerating scientific discovery, improving healthcare and well-being, and strengthening communities. They looked at the feasibility and the soundness of the approach, the clarity and quality of writing, and the inclusion of young investigators. So with that, 3 finalists were selected, and they will now pitch their research proposals to the jury and to you, the data science community. After the pitches, the jury will retreat for final deliberation, and during this time, we will present the vision competition, and once completed, the jury will return and then announce the winner of the research proposal competition. So we should invite now our candidate finalists. Do you want to take over at this point?
Yeah. Sure. If I have the schedule right, Brent van der Heijden is going to present first his pitch. I'm sitting there, so please come over, Brent. So he has a very interesting imaging data science approach, which talks about automatic organ segmentation. Brent, take it away. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Hold on.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction again. My name is Brent, and I will introduce you to my main topic. So automatic organ segmentation based on novel imaging techniques and 3-dimensional deep convolutional networks in radiotherapy. Because in radiotherapy, we really want to kill the tumor. We really want to kill the tumor cells, and we want to spare the surrounding organs. But in order to tell the machine where the organ is, we need to segment a CT scan first, which is really time-consuming, which is really labor-intensive, and takes a lot of time. So how does this actually work in a clinical workflow? So when a patient is diagnosed with cancer, a CT scan is acquired at different slabs in the body. This gives us three-dimensional information which can be used to segment every single organ by a radiation oncologist, for example. But this is a very time-consuming task and can take up to 1 hour. If we then go to the numbers, if we know that in the Netherlands only around 100,000 new cancer patients were diagnosed in 2016 and around 50% is treated with radiotherapy, we know that 54,000 plans will be generated every single year. But can this not be done automatically? Can this not be done better? Well, there are already a few approaches. The first is the multi-atlas approach, where we will use all the knowledge of the patient, of the segmentation, and we will try to match it with our actual patient, and then we have an idea where the contour is. We already developed an algorithm like this, and it won the 5th prize at the International Automatic Contouring Challenge. Another approach is to use a deep learning or a machine learning. But we really want to use the three-dimensional info a CT scan gives us instead of the two-dimensional slices. So this is really an advantage, but it lacks a bit of GPU memory. So for example, we can use a three-dimensional unit exposed here. I will not go into detail, but let's say this is the place where the magic happens. So we want to use three-dimensional information, but actually one CT scan with the segmentation can go up to 600 megabytes. So what can we do? We can first crop the volume, which gives already smaller volume, and then we can resize it, which can go up to 20 megabytes. But actually, we will lose a bit of resolution there. So can this not be done more efficiently? Well, we propose a new idea where we will combine both approaches, so the Atlas approach with the deep learning approach. So we will get our cropped image again, which you can see here, and then with our multi-Atlas approach, we'll try to find different sliding window boxes in the volume, which can be used to learn our three-dimensional unit in full resolution, because there's no lack of information anymore. But can we not improve the image itself, that it's more clear for the algorithm that this is an eyeball and this is a brainstem? Yes, we can. Recently, there is a novel image system called dual energy CT, where we can acquire low and high energy images. But based on these images, we can do post-reconstruction techniques, which gives a new image with less artifacts, less noise, better contrast, which can be beneficial, or we believe this is really beneficial for the algorithm. So what are the benefits then? In short term, it can give a high-quality gastric radiation oncologist where he only needs to modify a segmentation. It reduces the inter-rater observability, which means it's actually a difficult world to say that every oncologist draws a contour differently, so this reduces the variability. And in the long term, both research and clinic, we can be more consistent between the radiation oncologist center, so the data from every oncology center can be used. There's less contouring work for the oncologist, but also for the researchers. We have shorter waiting times for the patient, because when the patient is scanned and comes off the table, it's already contoured. And multiple scans are no longer needed at the different days. For example, we can get rid of MRI in the delineation procedure. So as a final conclusion, we think our automatic segmentation algorithm leads to better cancer treatments, leading to better quality of life for the patient by reducing unnecessary waiting times and also radiation-induced side effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brent, also for staying in time. We have decided after the talk to give 5 minutes for questioning Brent for his proposal, and we'll do that at the other candidates as well. If you have a question from the floor, please raise your hand, or from the jury. Otherwise, oh, you have a question? Okay, we'll start here.
Thank you for your presentation. You are trying to collect data in a very innovative way, in a very useful way. Are you going to use these data for other purposes? Statistical modeling, for instance, using experience, using segmentation that already worked to see if you can develop predictive models? Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because that's one of the main goals of automatic contouring. Because if we have golden standards drawn by a radiation oncologist, And we can do automatic contouring, for example, in radiomics research or predictive outcome research. We don't have to delineate every single patient anymore, which can speed up the process. So if we have a new patient, it should not be delineated anymore. It can be done automatically, and we can directly apply our model, which gives directly the result. So it's less time consuming in the clinic, and it's more consistent as well.
A question from the floor? Yeah, please. There's a hand there.
So thanks as well for the nice talk. My question would be then, as the next step, you described the approach. Do you also have some estimator about how your model then would perform against this golden standard of a human judgment or specialist judgment?
Yes, actually. So if we ask different oncologists to delineate an organ at risk or a tumor, for example, there's already a difference. And we really think, or we really believe, that the algorithm can perform in the same measure as the inter-rater observability between those three oncologists.
Okay. And how long does it roughly take to train this network?
We think that on a GPU, for example, a Titan X, it takes around 24 hours to train, and to apply the model will be much faster.
Okay, thanks.
I have one more question, then we have to wrap up. So I was calculating 50,000 patients per year, and you're going to save an hour of radiation oncologist time. That is 50,000 hours. So that means 50 radiation oncologists. Because we just heard that all problems are societal, what are you going to do with the 50 radiation oncologists that now have no work?
That's also a very good question. But actually, the radiation oncologist spends most of its time in delineating tumors, which is more important. So to detect a tumor automatically is more important to delineate an organ automatically, because the organs are almost the same in every patient, but the tumor comes in different ways. So that's more difficult. So we can still let them delineate contours and let them decide. We can also let them decide if the contour is drawn correctly. If there is a difficult case which is not learned by the algorithm, for example, he can take a look into it. But he can also spend more of his time in doing research. What therapy is really needed, for example. So he can shift his time. He can shift his time from delineating to other more useful things in the clinic.
Okay, thank you very much. Give an applause for Brent. Next up, if my schedule is right, is Camille. Is that true? Intelligent games for assessing cognitive, social, and physical capabilities of elderly and children. So this is an interesting proposal that has a different approach, so not cancer, but children and the elderly. Also, it's a whole group. I was just calling one name. So please, Marion, Frederik, and Rico, 5 minutes you have.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Marion, and together with my colleagues Frederik and Rico, we're going to talk about our project, which concerns intelligent games for assessing cognitive, social, and physical capabilities of elderly and children. So the problem we want to help with is improving healthcare and well-being for both elderly and children by creating automated assessments. So assessments are indeed an important part of education and healthcare. They help, for example, in determining if a treatment or a therapy is needed. Think, for example, of a child that is having a delay in his language development, or an elderly that is having dementia, for example. And assessments are indeed an important part of any educated decision. But the problem here is that assessments, they can be very stressful for children and elderly, because first of all, they often require artificial test environments, which can lead to very high expectation pressure. And as a result from that, the test results might be influenced by the comfort level of the child or the elderly. Second of all, the assessments are very much time-consuming for both the subject and the experimentalist. And therefore, we avoid assessments whenever possible, even though it is so important. So the question is now, why not just hire more teachers and more caregivers? Well, we are already facing a shortage of approximately 900 teachers in primary education in the Netherlands right now. We are also facing a shortage of caregivers, even though we have an increasing elderly population. A second problem that we're facing is that this is what new teachers think they will do, teach the kids. And this is what new caregivers think they will do, take care of the elderly. But when talking to experienced teachers and caregivers, this is what they spend most of their time doing. Paperwork assessment, documentation, all that. So the question is now, would it not be nice if part of the assessment process could be automated to free those caregivers and teachers? And can we then assess in natural environment continuously and with less stress?
So maybe tools from data science and robotics can actually help us with this. Our idea is to create an automated assessment device like this dice, which is stuffed with sensors and artificial intelligence and data science algorithms. So the children and the elderly, they will play with this device, which will keep them fit, and at the same time, it automatically assesses and documents their capabilities. So the key idea is really that they just play and that we do the rest. So the children and the elderly will not even notice that they're being assessed, so there will be no stress and just fun. The combination of a game device and data science also opens up a lot of new opportunities. For example, think about the continuous long-term testing that we can do in a natural environment where the testing actually takes less effort from the teachers and the caregivers, and where the test results will be less influenced from the experimentalists, and also the automated evaluation of those test results. In order to be able to do this, we will need to do research on novel data science methods and digital infrastructure. So the research that we perform goes into speech recognition, computer vision, and automated assessments of social, physical, and cognitive capabilities. An example would be the language abilities that someone has. And then another key challenge, as mentioned, is the digital infrastructure. This is since we really want to hide the complexity of the algorithms from the end users. However, it raises questions on liability, security, privacy, and ethics.
This is how we would like to maximize impact and how we're already maximizing it. We are not just developing for elderly caregivers and teachers, but we're actually developing together with them. Also, we work with partners that represent large networks already, where we have direct contacts to the CEO so that we can actually have very short decision lines. And since these partners actually represent already by themselves more than 200 facilities, we are very hopeful that positive developments on our side will quickly reach many elderly and children. We are benefiting from strong partners and also from a very strong advisory board, including end users, researchers, stakeholders, and industries. And we have the ambition to launch a new startup if we are successful with our developments. The research that we are performing raises and addresses questions not only on data science and artificial intelligence, but also economics, liability, security, privacy, and ethics. And in order to address these, we formed a very strong, powerful team, not only of DKE honor students, but where we actually get help and support now from researchers from almost all faculties of Maastricht University. To summarize, what we're proposing and what we're working on is to use data science for innovative assessment solutions. And we are confident that this actually leads to strong benefits for elderly and children who benefit from better assessments in natural environments, for caregivers and teachers because we would like to free them of the burden of documentation so they can do more work around the time so they have the focus. Thanks a lot.
1 minute over time, but I thought it was quite interesting, to be honest. Questions from the floor or the jury? Yep, you go first.
So this looked...
Thank you.
This looked like a huge project. So are you planning to actually diagnose all possible diseases among elderly and children? Or what is actually a success in this project for you?
Okay.
What is the first step, maybe, which you consider a successful step?
Very good question, thanks a lot. So in date, we have ambition, also due to the many researchers, to go in lots of different areas. That's why we actually mentioned, that's why we actually, so again, thanks a lot for the question. So indeed, we have the ambition to go in lots of different areas, for instance, including language processing and analysis of social and physical capabilities. But you're also absolutely right, we have to focus somewhere first, right? And what we do is we indeed ask our end users, what is the most pressing thing? Where can we actually help you best? What's the first step to go? And what we looked into first is assessing physical capabilities of elderly and looking into language actually for children.
Other questions from the audience, perhaps? Yeah, there's a question way in the back. Sorry, I sort of ran the back. Sorry, Alex.
Hello, thank you very much for this very interesting idea. So I can clearly see like the impact that you want to have and the advantages that you bring for elderly people, for children, for hospitals, I can imagine. But I think you raised the point, or you hinted at yourself, you asked about ethics. So immediately when you said that people don't even recognize that they're assessed, for me it popped up. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really like that idea, but I think you will run into a lot of trouble and questions regarding ethics because they don't know they are assessed. So what would be your answer, or how do you go through this process of getting the, you can go, you can do, you can experiment? How does it work? Thank you.
That's indeed, it's like a very interesting question. It's also something that we are asking ourselves. So finding a good trade-off between like being sufficiently informative so that, for instance, especially elderly and children which cannot often make decisions by themselves, but somebody else actually does decisions for them, are sufficiently informed of the fact that they are going to be assessed, that they are actually aware of this. But we would like to make it in a way that it actually becomes more natural. So it's not just like somebody actually is like asking you to write now your next paper exam, but that you actually just so used to the fact that somebody is actually looking after you, that somebody is actually caring for you, that this actually not becomes a burden anymore for you.
Okay, with that, time is over. Thank you for the question, and applause for this great pitch. And talking about ethics and, I guess, legal questions, the next pitch is going to talk about demystifying machine learning algorithms, especially with the new European law coming up with the right to transparency. And this is a team, also a multidisciplinary team from Law, Biz, and others. All right, start, guys.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arno, and I'm a master's student in business analytics at the Maastricht School of Business and Economics. And I'm very pleased today to introduce you to a research proposal which I also plan to write my thesis about. But before we dive in, can we quickly do a raise of hands? How many of you have heard about the general data protection regulations? Wow, okay, thank you. And another one, how many of you are familiar with machine learning algorithms or automated decision-making algorithms? That's a good turnout, thank you so much. So we have a very educated audience, but as we can see, even in this audience, more people are familiar with the machine learning than with the GDPR. And this is not surprising, since at the present moment in time, there's been rapid advancements made in the space. And we're already past the stage where many important decisions in all industries are made completely autonomously without human intervention. And those decisions affect each and every one of us profoundly in our daily lives. The GDPR, on the other hand, at least outside of this room, are far less well known. There are a set of important European-wide laws that will come into effect in May this year, less than 100 days from now. And among many other provisions, they also stipulate a right to explanation, which will require organizations to explain their data-driven decision-making. So, for example, you could envision a bank and one of their customers applying for a mortgage. So, starting from May, this customer will have a legal right to ask why this decision was granted or denied. Now, you may think that all this causes is another bureaucratic hurdle or step, but in fact, the problem is far more serious, since it not only causes a legal problem, but also a technical one, since at this moment in time, most algorithms are not easily directly explainable. So, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, the 7 stages of grief. Every individual that faces a new unknown situation in life goes through the stages of fear and uncertainty. But the same holds true for organizations. So upon hearing about GDPR and what it means for them, almost all data-driven organizations at the moment, oops, that's not what I wanted, find themselves either in shock or in disbelief. Not necessarily because they don't want to comply, but simply because they do not know how, since it's not such an easy thing to do. So what we want to do is, we want to help maneuver them safely through the valley of despair and build a bridge to bring them out safe on the other side. And I'll hand over to Dennis, my mentor, who will tell you what we exactly have in mind.
Yeah, thank you very much, Arne. So I think most of the people, especially in this room, will agree with me when I say that using the terms machine learning and explainability in the same sentence is enough to give data scientists a very bad nightmare. So the reason for that is simple. Some machine learning algorithms cannot really be explained. So we want to address this problem by creating a framework. And with this framework, we aim at helping researchers and practitioners to assess and hopefully to improve the explainability of their models. So here is our tentative plan of attack. So first, we will attempt to create a definition of explainability in order to form a shared language among business people, lawmakers, and technical people like us. So then we define various levels of explainability over there based on our definition of explainability. So based on this definition and those levels, we will analyze machine learning algorithm families. For the sake of simplicity, let's say we have two types of algorithm families, white box and the black box. So the white box algorithms, such as the decision trees, can be directly explained. However, the black box algorithms, such as neural networks, we need to come up with more creative solutions for that. So, such as hacking or reverse engineering. For example, by providing a large spectrum of inputs and by observing the outputs, we may have some understanding regarding the internal workings of this black box. So finally, in the future, we envision data scientists will not only be reporting about the accuracy of their models, but also the explainability of them. This is exactly the reason why we think this research is not only interdisciplinary, but also has the potential to be a foundational one.
Thank you so much. Wow. So we want to influence the very way research is being conducted? Yes. And we believe this is necessary, as this directly affects the very lives of us. We acknowledge the complexity of the problem at hand, yet we believe that by breaking it down, it can be tackled. Specifically, we have the following deliverables in mind. We want to come up with our explainability assessment framework, which will lay the foundation for this shared language to emerge between different disciplines. We want to create open source libraries that can immediately be put to use by researchers and professionals alike. Of course, we're going to write a paper, and ideally we would like to organize some conferences, for example at Brightlands, to dissipate our knowledge and findings with the broader community. Now, tackling such a complex problem demands a unique mixture of interdisciplinary experts, and we're extremely happy and want to thank the organizers that actually this competition here allowed us to assemble a dream team just like that, which is crazy enough to believe that we can pull this off together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Questions for this speech? You start.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have perhaps a not very specifically related question, but what is the room for theory in this kind of research? I mean, collecting data and trying to identify data, trying to look at different black boxes or white boxes, where do we put theory in?
If I may take it, well, first of all, the very first step that needs to happen, I think the big elephant in the room right now is, what is this thing called explainability? Since not even within one of the disciplines, people have a clear understanding about it, and far less across them. And the crucial thing right now is, like business, technology and law alike will have to somehow commonly talk about this issue. So the theory, I would say the important part is via this explainability assessment framework. First of all, we come up with one common understanding with clear definitions that can also be parameterized then for our algorithms to work upon. So that's where the theory ties in.
Right. Other questions? I had a question. So we just spent 5 years working very hard on getting all this data and having a beautiful deep learning system. And we have this startup now, and we're going to make truckloads of money. And now, and the reason that we're so successful is because we have this special model algorithm that we've developed. Now, you're going to hack and reverse engineer my algorithm and cost me my business? Is that what you're proposing?
No, not really. We are going to give you the ability to hack your algorithm in order to understand what your algorithm does, so that you can explain it to your customers.
Yeah.
That sounds much better.
And we'll help you sell it to the companies, because they will complain and say, all this is well and great, but how do we stay within the legal framework while using your cutting-edge approach?
Okay. So thank you very much. No, hold on. We have to stop the competition, I'm afraid. And we'll go into... All right.
Alex,
because you're begged.
So what happens after you can explain the unexplainable? Do you reassess the score?
What do you mean?
Sorry, so let's say you have an algorithm which is not explainable. After you apply your framework, it is suddenly explainable. So do you reassess the score?
Well, Holy Grail is reached and everyone is happy. However, there are certain fundamental theorems out there that make it highly unlikely for that to happen. So.
All right. With that, the competition is over and the jury will start deliberating on the outcome. Thank you.
To build the suspense, the jury will leave, but you're not going to be deprived of anything else, but you're going to have to wait to know the outcome of these 3 incredibly interesting projects. My name is Sally Wyatt. I'm the Professor of Digital Cultures in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and a colleague of Tamar Sharon, who you already saw in the video earlier. And I'm going to help you through the next bit of the program. My first task is to introduce 2 people, one of whom is Professor Tjelling Svierstra, Professor of Philosophy in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, who specializes in the politics and ethics of new and emerging science and technologies. And the fun thing for him, that means he gets to, some days think about genomics and some days about new food and some days about neuroscience, but he also turns his mind to data and data science and the digital, which is very good for us. He was the chair of the essay competition about what would a future of the data-driven society look like, and he's going to tell us a bit more about him and his jury, and the outcome and all sorts of exciting things. And a bit later on, Professor Sophie van Onacker, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, will present the prize for this second competition. And she's not only the Dean, she's also the professor of the Jean Monnet Professor in Administrative Governance, and has also done work about the politics of information and co-edited a book that was published a few years ago together with Tannelie Blom about the politics of information in the case of the European Union. So also in FASOS, we've helped very minimally. Other people have done most of the work. We've helped organize the events today, and you'll see me again later. But now, Professor Svierstra.
Okay, thank you. Indeed, I had the honor to be the chair of a very enthusiastic jury, which you see here. And I think that we were also enthusiastic because we all firmly believe that imagination is not only key to scientific research and technology development, but also to explore in advance possible consequences of technological innovations. So how might data affect our future societies and cultures? Because if history teaches us one thing, it's basically that technology always does less and more than expected. It never quite lives up to the original promises and expectations, but there are always unintended consequences. So imagination is key in trying to anticipate those. We just saw a nice example that if we give the prize to the first team, we will see the streets full of roaming unemployed oncologists running amok. I'm not sure whether we want that. So we were enthusiastic, maybe even a bit more than the participants, because we have to admit that we were a little disappointed by the number of visions that were submitted. In the end, there were 9. But maybe the next time we organize a competition like this, maybe Christmas time is not the best time. So basically we scored the submissions on 5 criteria: significance, visionary, does it make you think, the impact on the future of a data-driven society, creativity, and last but certainly not least, clarity and quality of presentation. And I'm very happy to announce that with unanimity, we agreed on one clear winner. The winning vision really evokes the experience of living in a future data society. And it does so by using an engaging literary style and by offering a narrative with a nice twist in the middle. And the jury found the winning scenario to be both plausible and surprising, which is a very difficult balance to strike. Most importantly, the vision makes you think because it's morally ambiguous. It's not simply utopian, it's not simply dystopian. It really makes you reflect on the question, would I like to live in a society like that? Is that indeed a desirable future or is it not? So without further ado, I can now announce who won the prize by writing this winning vision, and it's Claudia Eger, currently PhD in Science and Technology Studies at VASOS.
Thank you for the very kind words. I shall now proceed to reading my essay. It is entitled Digital Morning or Manic by Design. It's 4 in the morning when Kay, who has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, is suddenly awoken by the upbeat sound of one of her favorite fitness tunes. There is something about the energetic pounding of the drums in this song that always manages to lift her spirits, and her smart home system knows it. Since Kay herself had not planned to wake up so early, she realizes, while still struggling to get out of bed, that this can only mean one thing. The level of hormones in her body had suddenly decreased overnight, alerting the system that her mood state was trying to take a turn towards depression. In the old days, such slight modifications of her blood values wouldn't even have been detected, and weeks would have passed before she finally reached a stage when denial would no longer have been possible. By then, her state of hopelessness and helplessness would have been so high, and turning over in bed would have required so much energy that it would have put Sisyphus to shame. Fortunately, smart technologies could now keep track of everything inside and outside of the human body. They knew more about people than people knew themselves, through the collection, integration, and quick analysis of variations in voice and speech patterns, in the quality of their social interactions and professional input, in consumption preferences and lifestyle choices. And they could intervene, not only by preventing things from taking a turn for the worse, but by modifying their blood values as well as their surroundings to increase their level of productivity and creativity. The slight quiver of her digital pump, releasing additional antidepressants and vitamins into her system, notified Kay that an agreement had finally been reached between her company and the one they had been trying to take over for months. They needed her to be sharp, efficient, indefatigable, and what better way to achieve this than by bringing her into a manic state? There was no point to wonder anymore whether or not to accept this invitation to go away for the weekend. She will be spending the coming weeks buried in paperwork, drafting and redrafting contracts, as more and more information about the behavior patterns and risk potential of the overtaken company's employees will be fed into her own company's data processing system. Fortunately, manic states had been broken into individual components. They could be triggered and intervened upon when necessary, so as to make the best out of the high level of energy and creativity characterizing them. Mania had thus not only been tamed among those who would have previously been prone to experience it, but for the lucky few in upper management, it could be triggered and maintained by design for as long as it was necessary, for as long as they were necessary. Thank you.
Is our jury coming back? Okay, because according to my program, they're next up. But so what should I do while I'm waiting? I could tell you a story about my holiday. If the people are here, we could already present Claudia with her prize. Oh, there are questions, of course. Are there any questions about Claudia's very interesting... Yes.
Where can we get the essay? Where can we read
Oh
it?
yes, all of the essays will be or are already available on the website. So not only the winning essay, but all of the other entries. Sorry, you need the microphone.
So in your vision, everyone is being normalized? Or is everyone, is the system kind of... I don't know, taking or looking into the individuals. Like there are people who like to be in pain, there are people who don't like to be in pain, right?
I think this is something that every reader should actually decide for themselves. I had a particular idea in mind when writing this essay, but I think one of the beauties of writing something like this is the ambiguity. I think every one of us should actually think for ourselves whether we'd like to live in such a world and what we'd pick from it, the pain or these great highs that you can have.
Other questions from the jury members? Or you've all read it, but sorry, I can't.
Sorry. This is a tricky question. Well, I think there are certain aspects that all of us would probably enjoy, but I think we need to be very careful about the choices that we make and what kind of arguments we would be using in order to make those choices. And to be very much aware that the choices that we make are not restricted to ourselves, but would definitely have an impact upon others. So if I were to choose, for instance, in this sense, to be brought into a manic state to finish my dissertation on time, or even quicker than that, that will impact my other colleagues who may choose not to do so, right? So. I think it's a trickier or more difficult question than that can be answered through a yes or no. I think the beauty is in the argumentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Perfect timing. And I believe I now hand back to the chair of the research competition.
Yes. So. Luckily, we made a decision, but I'm not going to announce it yet because I'm first going to ask the chairman of the University Fund to give an introduction on the fund and on the prize that we're going to give.
Hi, my name is Jos Kivits, and I'm not the chairman of the University Fund, but only the director because the vice chairman is over there and I don't want to be in opposition. First of all, let me thank you for not showing pictures of me at a rock festival. Thank you. I'm very grateful for that. Why am I standing here? One of the roles I have to fulfill is be the director of the University Fund Limburg, which is a charitable foundation supporting the University of Maastricht since more than 50 years. And what we do, in essence, is try to find money with private sources, companies, foundations, philanthropists, regular, nice people from Maastricht, students, alumni, whoever, private people and private companies, private foundations, who would like to support science and Maastricht University in particular. What we do then is save and increase the amounts of money coming in, and in the end of the process, there is this giving away the money to researchers, scientists, people in education, etc., meaning probably most of you, to fulfill what your dreams are, and you don't always have enough money from the regular means, but you would like to have sometimes something on top of that. And that is what the University Foundation is for. It's like working in a quadrant where love and fame and money plays an important role. I mean, people give out of love, and people give out of a desire for fame, and all of that in between. It's always about money in the end. Of course, it's about a relationship, but it's about money in the end. And the side effect is that the University of Maastricht has quite a benefit from it. That's what we try to do. Against that background, it's always nice to support new initiatives, to support innovation, to support young people with a desire for science and helping society. And that is why the University Fund is proud to be sponsor of the prize of the research competition. I just wanted to add, I mean, when you talk about sponsoring, there's always this word of the sponsor to show himself. That's what I did.
Thank you, Jos. And thank you, obviously, for giving us the opportunity to give out the prize. So, as Michel said, we had 13 excellent contributions on paper, and we spent an hour arguing on the phone already to cut it down to 3, because there were some really good proposals that we had to reject. So all 3 proposals were pitched today, and I think you would all agree with me that, first of all, they all did a great job pitching their proposals and answering the questions, which I think for such young students is worthy of a great hand of applause already. Can I ask one rep or all rep, it's also possible, that pitch to come here, and then I'll explain who won it. So please all come forward. Now the 3 proposals that we had were different because some of them were very clear and structured, if you want, and had a clear plan of investigation. Others were very wild ideas that require still a lot of thought, and the jury sometimes thought, well, you know, is that going to work or not? And I think in the deliberation we tended to go. We were primed. That's the term. We were primed a little bit more for innovativeness and wild ideas than for really a clear plan which was structured. So we decided in the end to give the award to pitch number 2, the elderly and the children serious games. Before the others, I will give, first of all, a certificate of the nomination, because as I said, from 13 being the 3 that were nominated is worthy in itself. So let me give that to the number 2 and 3, and then Jos will give the prize to the number 1 student.
I think before our esteemed director hands over this check, and this is the spontaneity of this university. You know, we have heard love is ubiquitous here, fair we do, but it's fame and money. So spontaneously, my colleagues in the executive board have decided that we also, next to the honorable mention of the certificate, will give number 2 and 3, next to this honorable mention, a check for €500 to stimulate also your collaboration for the future.
Now, Jos, please present the certificate to the winning group. Yes. picture has to be great. Thank you all.
So, could I invite Professor van Honacker now to present the other ward, which doesn't have quite the same drama because we already know. But if you want to give her money as well, that's also good.
Could I ask Claudia Eger to join me? Yes. Claudia, well, I think we are extremely happy that you have won the prize. I think we will all agree, and together with the jury, that you did an excellent job, not only in presenting a very nice essay, which was very well written, but of course also asking very critical questions, questions which are very relevant today, and actually questions that are not asked enough, I would say. And of course, these are typically the questions you raised. Well, you are from FASOS, so these are typically the questions we raise at our faculty, and we will continue to raise them. And we are currently actually establishing a Bachelor in Digital Society that is going to start hopefully in 2019. We are still working on that under the leadership of Challing and several other leadership of Sally Wyatt and other colleagues like Challing and Tamar, whom you have been seeing, and many others. And so, well, I think congratulations, and we will wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And we also have some flowers and a check for you. And we will also have a joint picture.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. That was very exciting. But the afternoon isn't over yet. There is still more. So I now have the great pleasure of introducing Professor Lucy Suchman. And in a few moments, you will see another video. But before we get to that video, I've warned Lucy that there's another video coming. I'm not going to repeat what's in the video, but I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words. As for those of you who came in late, she will also be getting an honorary doctorate tomorrow, but this is her kind of moment to speak and share some of her ideas with you. So Lucy Suchman has made major contributions to our understanding of how people interact with computer systems, based on her deep understanding of computer systems, but also of how people work together and how people work with machines. The 2 editions of her book, Plans and Situated Actions, have been cited, according to Google Scholar, more than 13,000 times. Now, of course, we don't believe in those kind of metrics, but we'd all be really thrilled with those numbers. Now, over the past months, in preparation for today and for tomorrow, I've had to write several descriptions of Professor Suchman's work and her general worthiness. A page or 2 for the faculty board, for the executive board, for the board of deans, for the University of Council, 20 words in the video you're about to see, so you can guess which 20 I wrote. The interview with Observant that is published today, which I did outside the zoo in Amsterdam last week during the storm. So if some things got lost in the wind, that's my excuse. So anyway, I mentioned in those things all the things that you're going to hear in the video, plus her more recent research that kind of brings her understandings of humans and machines to the study of war and automated weapon systems. Though today she's going to talk about other autonomous devices in healthcare. So after the, I don't know how many kind of requests from somewhere in the university, I began to think, how many different ways can I say that Professor Suchman is brilliant and her work resonates strongly with the work that's being done in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and across the university. Her interdisciplinary approach and her commitment to using her research and teaching to make a difference to the world fits perfectly with the ethos of Maastricht University. And I'm not really complaining about having to write all those things. It was a great pleasure. But one thing always got left out of those very formal descriptions, even though it always came up in informal discussions, and it's there today in the Observant. Now, some of you may have noticed or seen those reports about the differences between reference letters written about women or men with similar qualifications. And crudely put, men are described as intellectually brilliant, and women are described as kind and helpful. And this is a problem for women looking for jobs. Now, I've never understood this. I'm a bit slow. Because when I read or write such letters, I try to do it symmetrically. So if a man is described solely in terms of his intellectual ambitions, I think to myself, self-absorbed alpha male, does not play nicely with others, not likely to be a good colleague. So be warned for those of you who write those kinds of letters. Anyway, this is a very roundabout way of saying that Lucy Suchman is a lovely person. She has indeed done amazing work from which many of us have learned to mind the gaps between plans and actions when technologies are introduced into a range of settings, and about how to do ethnography. And I've always been rather envious of her colleagues at Lancaster, because her commitment to them is really kind of palpable. But luckily for me and for others, she's also very kind and supportive to a much broader group of students and colleagues around the world. And of course, don't get me wrong, I'm really lucky with my colleagues in Maastricht, and I imagine there are people around the world who are envious that we have such a nice group here. So now that I've made a start in embarrassing Lucy, we'll continue with the video. And then I will invite Professor Suchman to come and tell us about the fantasy of social robots.
Lucy Suchman is a professor of anthropology of science and technology in the Department of Sociology at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. At the famous Xerox PARC Research Lab in Palo Alto, California, she worked as principal scientist and manager and pioneered the field of corporate ethnography. Her book, Plans and Situated Actions, The Problem of Human-Machine Communication, provided the intellectual foundations for the field of human-computer interaction. Her contributions have been recognized by both computer scientists and social science and humanities scholars. She has received the Lifetime Research Award from the Association of Computing Machinery Special Interest Group on Computer-Human Interaction. She was also awarded the Society for Social Studies of Science John Desmond Bernal Prize.
Okay, thanks. Well, that could have been much worse. I'm quite relieved. Okay, just get myself configured here. So first of all, I want to say this has been a really fascinating afternoon, and I've found many threads woven across all of the different contributions. So I'll leave finding those threads to each of you, but I just wanted to make one connection back to Carol's talk, because I think one thing that's going to join our two talks is the idea of, first of all, expanding the frame with which we look at things. So I think Carol has done that in relation to data sciences. And as part of that expansion of the frame, recognizing the value of the largely undervalued and invisible labors that are required in order to enable the capacities of the technologies that we develop. So I think you're gonna hear that theme again in what I have to say. So I began to draw together the ideas that I'm presenting today in the context of a public lecture in Barcelona last year that was part of an event titled "In the Hands of Machines," about the developments in the field of so-called care robots. And I started off dwelling for a moment on the figure of hands, because I thought that was a really interesting kind of framing, to think carefully about the implications of what it means to say that something or someone is in the hands of another. And I think these two photos are helpful in that respect, because they make this kind of figurative reference to being in the hands of someone more literal. They're both focused on the work of hands in caregiving. Both of these photographs were found through an open-ended Google search that I did on elder care. And if we look at the websites on which they were posted, we see that the image on the left illustrates a blog post setting out concerns regarding the adequacy and availability of funding for the implementation of the UK's CARE Act of 2014. And the image on the right accompanies an article titled, "Would You Trust a Robot to Take Care of Your Grandpa?" There have been many variations on this. And this is an article in which the Open Robo Ethics Initiative publishes its 2014 findings on public attitudes towards robot caregivers. The image on the right presupposes, so the image on the left cites a very persistent, widely invoked problem, that of funding for human caregivers. And the image on the right presupposes that a solution to this problem is robot caregivers, and that the only remaining question then might be problems of trust, of public acceptance, of a resistance to them. But I want to propose that the question of whether robot caregivers are trustworthy begs two prior questions which receive much less attention in the public media, but which I think are much more crucial, actually, to the discussion. So the first question is this: on what basis should we accept the premise that adequate funding for human caregiving is impossible? Now, I can't fully answer this question myself, as I'm not a labor economist, but it's the one that I think we all need to be asking. What are the assumptions underlying the premise that there's a shortage of human caregivers? And might those assumptions themselves be open to challenge? The second question that doesn't get asked in discussions of the ethics of robot caregivers is this: on what basis should we accept the proposition that robot caregivers are even a viable possibility? And it's this question that I want to examine a little more closely, because getting clearer about the answer is necessary if we're to open the space for other ways of thinking about and investing in inventive solutions to the problem of care. So what can these images tell us about care? So in this case, the care of giving medication, what that entails. So we could start just by looking at them a bit more closely. So we can start just by looking at these two images more closely. And we can begin with the bodily positioning of the caregivers in each case in relation to those receiving the medication. So the multiple ways in which the caregiver on the left orients to the woman to whom she's handing a pill, through her leaning in to the appropriate distance, her monitoring of the woman's face. And actually, I think for many of us, we might get the sense that this woman's she has a visual impairment, just by the very subtle ways in which her eyes are oriented. So how is the caregiver orienting to that? How is she leaning in to a kind of appropriate distance and monitoring the face and her encouraging smile and the alignment of the hand holding the pill in relation to the hand that feels it to pick it up, the glass of water that's waiting for the moment when it will be needed. And that's just to mention the most obvious. On the right, we might note the substitution of a pill bottle for an individual pill. The reach of the recipient to meet the robot's grasp. The question of how and why this PR2 mobile robot, which is a development platform widely adopted in university robotics labs, is imagined as the right tool for this job. We might also ask how it got into the living room in the first place. And we might think about what understanding of medication as both a substance and a practice each of these caregivers has. What further labels of care each might be able to provide in the next frame, the moment after this one that we're being shown. Much of my own work over the past 30 years has been concerned with how technologies are framed, in some ways quite literally, in images and stories about their capabilities, particularly in cases where machines are figured as replicating human agencies. And this is, of course, part of the long-standing project of automation, the delegation of human abilities to machines. So the human-like robot is just one of the many forms that automation takes, but it seems the one that most captures media attention and by implication most captures the public imagination. So then let me very briefly trace just a bit of the history of the human-like machine. So those of you who are involved in robotics will be aware that the idea of the humanoid robot goes back to origins in the word robot in the early 20th century. And the robot's links to questions of labor are actually there from the start. So this is an image from the play R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots, by the Czech playwright Karel Čapek, which was first performed in 1921. And interestingly, this was 10 years after Frederick Taylor published his famous work on scientific management, laying the foundations for the rationalization and the automation of labor. So Čapek introduced the term robot from robota, which is the Czech word meaning enforced labor or slave. And the theme of the play is the humanity or lack of it, both of those who create the robots and of the creations themselves. So interestingly, the word robot itself was coined as a kind of social commentary on the project of the human-like machine and the questions of inequality and social justice that it raised. But of course, the name, while the robot by that name emerges in the early 20th century, the project of creating an artificial human is much older. Feminist scholars have somewhat provocatively pointed to the obvious connections between the dream of artificial life and a kind of male birthing, including aspirations to the design of a human, and more specifically a woman, more perfect than the real thing. So the story of Pygmalion appears earliest in a Hellenistic work that's retold in Ovid's Metamorphosis, where the king Pygmalion is represented as a sculptor who fell in love with an ivory statue that he had crafted with his own hands. So in answer to his prayers, the goddess Venus or Aphrodite brought the statue to life and united the couple in marriage. And those of you who follow developments in humanoid robots will be aware that of the current media storm regarding the latest revivifications of this ancient fantasy. I don't have time to talk about that, but it'll be familiar, I'm sure, to some of you at least. So by the 18th century in Europe, automata were a very popular form of spectacle. And one constant actually through the long history of automata is the importance of their staging, including a kind of setup that centers some things while placing others off stage. That's what we're talking about actually as a thread throughout. And then an accompanying narrative that directs our attention in what we should be looking at and what we should not be paying attention to. This practice, I would argue, continues in contemporary humanoid robotics and actually in the art of the demonstration more broadly. So on the left, we have an 18th century staging of automata for their patrons. Oops, got some kind of a automatic interference here. Oh, whoops. Okay, I guess I had my clicker in the wrong place here. Yeah, so on the left we have this 18th century staging of automata for their patrons, and on the right we have a demonstration of Pepper, the humanoid robot in 2016, at the IBM University of Texas Research Lab on robots for elder care, which researchers promise they will transform into a, quotes, multi-purpose elder care robot assistant. There's a lot more that we could say about these two images if we had more time. Now, a central move in my analysis of human-like machines is, as I mentioned, the methodological strategy of kind of expanding the frame, both historically, as I've kind of suggested, but also in some sense spatially, or in terms of connection and distributions of agency. And a case in point is one of the first demonstrations of the achievement of human-like artificial intelligence, which was IBM's Project Deep Blue. Now, chess, as you undoubtedly know, is the canonical site for, particularly in the early days, enacting AI, given both its very powerful association with human genius on the one hand, and also insofar as it is, or it can be modeled as a closed world with a fixed set of rules that generate an extraordinarily large set of possibilities. So on May 11th, 1997, the story goes, an IBM computer named Deep Blue defeated the world chess champion Garry Kasparov in the deciding game of a 6-game match, which led to widespread media declarations that AI had finally achieved the holy grail of a machine intelligence that surpassed the human. So this image shows a moment in that final match. So on the left side of the table, we see Kasparov. He's hunched over the board. He's presumably contemplating his next move. And across the table from Kasparov sits another man, who's not named, whose gaze is directed at this computer terminal to his right. So where, we might ask, is Deep Blue? Now, to answer that question requires us to move outside the frame of this image, because the man pictured is not, of course, Kasparov's opponent, but rather a peripheral device mediating the input-output relations between the chessboard, for which he's the requisite pair of eyes and hands, and the terminal to his right, which is the interface to the processor. As the game proceeds, he enters Kasparov's moves via the terminal and then executes the moves that are displayed there in response. And this terminal, in turn, is networked to an array of, at the time, 512 PowerPC processors, which are positioned somewhere off stage and out of sight, combined with a raft of specialized chips designed to evaluate positions and coordinate data in real time, which in turn are maintained by a staff of technicians. The code being processed, moreover, is the product of extensive labors of software and electrical engineers, informed by a raft of chess experts consulting with IBM as part of the team. So far from a singular entity, in other words, Deep Blue is the nominalization of a network of laboring bodies that includes humans as well as multiple machines. Now, what if we apply this same analysis to Kasparov? If we follow STS scholar Hélène Millet, we can see Kasparov also not as a bounded individual, but as what Millet names a distributed centered subject. So, however rightly celebrated as an individual, Kasparov's genius is an effect of his relations with, among others, the long lineage of chess players and games through which his expertise is constituted. So rather than Kasparov being a singular agent while his opponent is distributed, in other words, both of them are made up out of network relations that are singularized through the ways that we render them as bounded individuals. But that doesn't imply that they're both distributed, does not imply that their agencies are the same, or even arguably that they're equivalent. Kasparov's competencies comprise his formation as a person who's deeply entangled with a very specific cultural practice for which he has a demonstrable gift and at which he has trained with enormous commitment and discipline. Going into this final game, Kasparov reported that he was tired, and in his words, he said he was just not in the mood to play. Now, Deep Blue, on the other side, was neither tired nor in any mood. So Kasparov made a small error, which might well have been missed by a human opponent, but was not missed by Deep Blue's search and analysis engines. For any current board configuration, the system analyzed the possibilities 10 moves ahead, examining 200 million board positions each second before producing a next move. And given that chess players take an average of 3 minutes to make a move, Kasparov would have had to stare at the board for 360 years to examine the moves that Deep Blue evaluated every 3 minutes. So there is a difference here. Okay, now I've applied a similar analysis, and I don't have time to go into it at length, to these two celebrity robots, which most of you probably know if you work in robotics. So on the left, we have roboticist Rodney Brooks with his robot Cog, a robot designed with a focus on hand-eye coordination. And then on the right, we have actually Cynthia Brazil, a student of Rod Brooks, with her robot Kismet, a robot head designed to mimic affective interaction. And The more elaborated analysis that I do of these two robots is based on a visit that I made to the AI lab, where I was able to see the robots in context. And the argument in both cases is that seeing them in context, basically COG was not operating when I visited the lab, was in the corner of the room. And the graduate student who was touring us around explained that nobody was actively engaged in doing research with COG at the moment. And so COG had fallen into a state of bit rot such that it wasn't operating. So that gave me this little glimpse into that extended human network that's required to give COG its agency. But the other thing I was really struck by was that I got to see COG from the waist down, because in media representations, this is the view you always see it of COG. And COG was actually on a pedestal, out of which came this huge sheaf of cables, again, going to a huge bank of processors. So in that way, this kind of individualized device got distributed into this network of humans and other machines. Kismet was operating, but Cynthia Brazil wasn't there, and I and the others in my group, we all tried to elicit some kind of readable affective responses from Kismet, and we all failed. And again, my analysis of that is, yes, not that Kismet is a failed robot, but that Kismet's agencies are dependent on the robot's relations to Cynthia. It's the long history of their work together and her work with the robot that actually gives it its affective effectiveness. And of course, in the demonstrations that you see of Kismet, it's very much these are being elicited, and then there's a narration that reads them for you and tells you how to see them. So this is a kind of, as I say, a kind of methodological strategy that I think is really helpful in helping us to see what's missing, what's left out of the frame. Now, as you probably know, Cynthia Brazil now works in the area of personal social robotics and has recently released a robot named Jibo. Jibo was first crowdsourced in 2014 and just released last year. And again, I can't go on at length about Jibo, but just to say that Jibo brings us into this realm of personal robot assistance, and that's where I want to spend the rest of my time. So the dream of the fantasy of the robot servant, of course, has been around for decades. For those of us from the United States, it's exemplified by a 1960s cartoon series called The Jetsons, which featured this no-nonsense robot maid named Rosie, and here she is with her inbuilt vacuum cleaner. And on the right, we have a humanoid robotic platform, which will, again, probably be known to all of you who work in robotics, the Atlas robot developed by the company Boston Dynamics, initially with funding largely from the US Department of Defense, but maybe hedging against downturns in future military funding. Boston Dynamics sold itself in 2013 to the Google conglomerate Alphabet and began to orient to more domestic applications for humanoid robots as well. This was part of a huge buyout of robotics companies under the internal project name Replicant, and Google again promised a general purpose robot that could cook and take care of the elderly by 2020. And this image is from a somewhat ironic video posted by Boston Dynamics, which shows Atlas almost managing to wield a vacuum cleaner. But the irony of this video acknowledges that Atlas is pretty inept at this task. And the Guardian newspaper, in a piece headlined, "Multi-million-dollar humanoid robot doesn't make for a good cleaner," in January of 2016, reproduces this video clip, which is in fast motion, because of course otherwise it would be really boring with this very upbeat techno music. And it shows the Atlas testing new code by as The Guardian says, getting the multi-million-dollar Atlas robot to do household chores. And then the article goes on to say that housework actually proves more difficult than you might imagine. Probably particularly if you've never done housework. But what's interesting about housework is that it's revealing of the conditions that are required for effective automation generally, and definitely robotics. Specifically, robots work well just to the extent that their environments, basically the stimuli that they have to process and the conditions for an appropriate response, can be engineered to fit their capacities. So the factory assembly line, of course, has in this respect kind of been made into the robot's home. It's perfectly set up for what robots need, and those things are engineered in relation to each other. Domestic spaces, in contrast, and the kind of practicalities of working within them are characterized by a level of contingency that has so far blocked attempts at automation beyond the kind of appliances that can either depend on human peripherals to set up their conditions of operation, so think about loading the dishwasher, or they can operate successfully through repetitive motion, like the robot vacuum cleaner Roomba and its various clones. So long underestimated in the value chain of labor, robotics for domestic work has some lessons, I think, about the extraordinary complexity of what we take to be even the most mundane activities. So then this brings us back to the question of elder care. So on the 8th of June of last year, Alphabet announced they were selling the company, Boston Dynamics, once again, to Japan's SoftBank Group, who are the makers of the humanoid robot Now, who's pictured here for an undisclosed sum. And that brings us back to the IBM multi-purpose elder care robot assistant, which the company has been testing at its Aging in Place lab based in Austin, Texas. So this is a story from the Business Insider reporting that, quote, the lab was designed to mimic experience seniors have in their own home. Sensors can detect when the stove's burners are on or when a person has fallen down. Even in its prototype stage, MIRA, which is the acronym, is equipped with cameras to read facial expressions, sensors to capture vital signs, and Watson-powered speech recognition to know when to call for help. All very familiar components in the configuration of smart things. And if we actually look more closely at what's involved in this system, it becomes clear that these humanoid robots are actually much closer to today's telecare devices. And so the designers imagine this progression through which ambient sensors first capture information about the home and activities in it, and then those are packaged into future robotic caregivers. So the vision is that we have a fully instrumented body, very much like Claudia's essay, fully instrumented body living in a fully instrumented, constantly surveilled living space, networked together either with continuously monitoring family or centralized sites of professional care. This is the standard configuration. Now, when I'm looking for counter examples, interestingly, the ones that I've found are here in the Netherlands. And actually the first experiment, the first really interesting piece of video that I found was from a Dutch public broadcasting show back in 2006 called Robot Love. Again, I can't go into the details, but this is about the introduction of Aibo, Sony Aibo dogs, to older people living in an apartment building. To me, the most fascinating thing, there's a lot to say about this video, but to me the most fascinating moment is one that goes by completely unnoticed in the narrative. We see the researcher, and this is a researcher in Indiana in the United States, and she's coming down the hall of this apartment building with her clipboard in her hand to visit one of the elderly people who's had this Aibo dog. And she knocks on the door, and this woman opens the door, and she says, "I'm so glad you came. His tail fell off." And then we see the researcher go and reattach the tail. Again, this is not of any interest in the scenography of this video, but to me it's this little moment when the question of maintenance actually presents itself. And that's, again, I think where we really need to be paying attention. But to me, one of the most interesting alternatives, and again, based here in the Netherlands, I found this in an article, again in The Guardian, which pointed to this video. So the Guardian article was titled, "How a Robot Could Be Grandma's New Carer," and it posed this question: can robots serve as a useful supplement to human contact, or do economic realities mean technology is pushing us towards a future where some of society's most vulnerable are passed into the loving arms of machines? And this returns us to the question of these economic realities that are referred to as if they're somehow naturally occurring, inevitable. But the alternative here, which is suggested in the same article, reports on Humanitas, which is a project, a nursing home, I gather, here in the Netherlands. Now, of course, this is a celebratory video. It shows us the best possible rendering. But the basic idea is that Humanitas offers rent-free apartments to students in exchange for 30 hours of work each month with their elderly neighbors. So basically, the students live in a wing, very, very nice suites in a wing of this building, and they do all sorts of different forms of hanging around and helping out. And what I like about this is it opens up this question of what other forms of invention we might look at in terms of elder care. What might an open, ongoing process of co-development look like in the case of technologies of care if we understand technologies in this broader sense of configurations or arrangements of people, social relationships, artifacts, living spaces, practices, institutions? What if the process were open to many forms of inventiveness, from mundane devices to new modes of relating, new modes of living together, which is what's being experimented with here? And some of these questions are being addressed through a very interesting project by my colleagues in Lancaster, Maggie Mort, Christine Milligan, and Celia Roberts, working with other colleagues in Barcelona, including Daniel Lopez Gomez, who I'm quoting here. And the focus of their research very much shifts from the idea of any sort of single novel device to a concern with what Gomez has called the bounded and inalienable undertaking of caring for these arrangements which configure our autonomous yet aging lives, which I think is a very lovely way of putting the situation. So in closing, let me just come back to these initial images and propose that what I'm calling here demystification of personal social robotics could in itself be a kind of ethical project. Again, before we turn to the question of the acceptability of social robots or public trust in them, I've argued that there are these two prior questions. First, what is the problem for which care technologies, and particularly robot caregivers, are the solution? What other logics, besides the sustainability of well-being for an aging population, inform investments in technologies of care? What are the political economies of investments in different approaches to care? And how is it that we've accepted the premise that well-paid, highly valued human care is an impossibility? And second, what grounds are there to believe that a robot could actually engage in the work of care? Because I think clarifying the technology's limits might then open up public discussion to alternative ways of addressing the problem of elder care, like creative new living arrangements and a revalorization of the labor of care so that more people would be drawn to that work. There would certainly be a place for new technologies in such a future, but it would, I think, be a very different one from the robot substitute for human caregivers. So finally, in closing, I'm mindful of the fact that today marks the launch of Maastricht's new Institute of Data Science. And while I haven't spoken directly to data sciences in my remarks, my hope is that the analysis that I've offered with respect to social robots will have some resonance with how we might think about the future of data analytics. First and foremost, I hope that Maastricht can take a lead in what I'm characterizing here as a project of demystification. With respect to so-called big data, this must surely include attention to the politics and practices of data construction and their implications for mobilizing data as a dominant mode of knowledge creation. Having spent the early years of my working life in a survey research organization, I have an acute appreciation for the messiness involved in the production of data as numerical values that leave their contingencies and their ambiguities behind. The loss of information required for datafication and its implications for the responsible deployment of data as evidence needs to be as central to our discussions as the technical advances that enable the field's growth. A primary danger concerns the expanding use of data profiling across a range of institutions. We heard about that in one of the projects presented. And I think science and technology studies provide a wealth of resources for understanding practices of classification and categorization. This has been a central project for STS, including both their generative but also their oppressive role in social ordering. And I think given the long and rich history of STS here at Maastricht, combined with the new institute, Maastricht is ideally positioned to take a lead in this project. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I think we have time just for kind of one or two questions, if there's anything people are really burning to ask, which I imagine there are after such a rich presentation. But I know people also have places. Sorry, I don't see any. Sorry, it's hard for me to see also with the lights, but, or any jury member? Yes. Oh, you can just turn, oh yeah, okay.
I really
It's on.
So with the risk of seeming the most curious person in the room, I wanted to ask you, so going back to the beginning of your presentation, should a robot take care of a grandpa?
Yes, and I guess, I mean, I hope it's clear that my answer to that question is no. And, you know, based first and foremost on what is for me the incredibility of the prospect if we actually attend to the work of care, but also the kind of totalizing narrative of a robot taking care of a human really, I think, moves us away from a much more variegated approach to thinking about the place of robotics in elder care, because I definitely believe there is a place for all sorts of robots in facilitating living as we age, but it needs to be much more specifically integrated into the arrangements that the technology is part of. It's not, you know, caregiver, elder person, robot, elder person. This isn't really the way care works even when humans give it. So it's a re-understanding of what care involves, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think the first reaction is always that it's, oh my God, you know, this is kind of a horrible thought. But I just wanted to point out that we have a PhD student at our faculty, and I just saw her in the audience there, Martina Kai. And she did a very interesting research looking at robots for elderly care and from a multi-stakeholder perspective. And I think one interesting finding was because of the robots, actually the grandchildren visited now more often. And actually, yeah, so actually it also has sometimes a lot of very surprising side effects. So the elderly people were very happy about this, and she could probably tell much more about her own research, but it was a very fascinating study she did using generative techniques with rich insights. So.
Okay, I mean, I think that's a great example. So the idea that robots could be, you know, then the robot is a playful device that draws children, that encourages social interaction. What is the investment in the kind of narrative in then instead, which is dominant in media and other kinds of representations of constructing the robot as a caregiver? Why? What are the stakes there? And what if we reframe that narrative so that the robot is a kind of enticing element to the changing dynamics of the sociality of these places where we live as older people?
I know there are other questions, but we'll be having drinks soon and there will be opportunities to ask them. So thank you again very much, Lucy.
Thank you.
Before I hand back to Michel Demontier to make a few final kind of remarks and push a few buttons that are very important, I would also just like to kind of thank you all for kind of being here, to thank our speakers, the wonderful kind of presentations that we've heard in relation to the contests, everybody who is involved in making this happen. I know Michelle's going to say that again, but I think you can't say it too often. Just like with data science, just like with the care of the elderly, there's a lot of invisible work that goes on in making these kinds of events happen, for which we're very grateful. But also the kind of final remark I would like to make, kind of echoing what Lucy Suchman said at the end, I think one thing that this afternoon has demonstrated for all of us is, I think, the kind of rich possibilities for working across the university, with the Brightlands campus, with all sorts of people to kind of give a really kind of interesting kind of spin on data science that I think could really help to put Maastricht on the map. So Michel, final words to you.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think this is really a dream come true for many of us, that we would see ourselves in the same room talking about such important subjects that will affect our society for the foreseeable future. And the fact that we talk not only about technology and innovation, but also the social consequence of that and how we should deal with law and many other aspects is exactly what we are hoping to do within the context of the Institute. So I want to take the moment to thank our wonderful panels, both for the research proposals and also for the vision. I think that was a lot of work that we asked of them, and they did a great job pruning our candidates and finding us really wonderful stories about both research and the vision for the future, and things that we can build on. So I'm very excited by that, and for the spontaneous contribution to further those efforts. I think that's invaluable. I do want to there were a lot of people involved in the organization of this event. We would be spending another 5 or 10 minutes talking about each and every one of them. You know who you are, but please join me in thanking each and every one of them for their great efforts in doing that. Now, the last thing that I want to tell you before we run off for drinks is that we have launched a new website to capture this essence of our community and to create a platform by which all of us can share our activities and our accomplishments. And whether you come from the social sciences, whether you come from the departments of data science and knowledge engineering, whether you come from law, or wherever it is you are coming from the university, we want to hear of you and we want to promote your work. And this is going to be the avenue that you get to do that. So today is the official launch day. However, it is the starting point. And I think if you are out there and you look at the site and you say, my story can be told on this site too, we welcome that contribution. Please get in touch with us and make sure your story is being told. Okay, with that, that is the end of the formal program. Please come outside and join us for refreshments, to peruse the posters and to check out the information market, and to browse and to have discussions with the members of your data science community. Thank you very much.